Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yet again, I'd like to first thank the Internet Services at Oxford University for the choppy situation. Hopefully, Saqib will get a better connection, or we will try again at a later time. Let's see. He's getting in and out. Saqib, are you with us? No. Saqib, go to a Starbucks, man. You're not fasting anymore.
I'm still holding on to hope here.
Oh yeah, okay. Let's hold on to hope.
Can you hear me?
Oh, it is.
Yes. We can hear you. Turn your camera off for a second and see if your sound is, because it may be taking a lot of. Can I do that? Okay, Saqib, can you hear me? Saqib, we see you. Don't, oh, he gave up.
Yeah,
he gave up. Oh. So how's it going?
It's all right.
I'm gonna give him a minute. and then see if we can get him back on.
Okay.
Meanwhile, how's it going, internet? So good to see you excited, Nouman sir. I love when people call me Nouman sir. What is that? Nouman sir. Okay, Saqib's coming back. It's gonna happen. Just watch. No. Man. No, not for you. Tuan FDFD. I can do it, you can't.
So I think that Saqib just needs to restart his computer. So we could talk for 5 minutes, couldn't we? I mean,
yes, we could talk for 5 minutes. We are now on ayah number 35 of Surah Yusuf. How do you think the experience has been so far?
It's been really unexpected, quite honestly. So once you really start to think, and especially in the discussion process, and and even before we get to sort of trying to compare with the Bible and other strands of ideas and thoughts. And
I'm talking about you and me, our struggle to go through the surah.
Yeah. It's been, it's very challenging, honestly.
Yeah.
The responsibility of trying to understand it properly and explain to others, I mean, that's very burdensome. But because that's more your job, talking to people. So it's the thinking process is very, very freeing, actually, when you are looking at what all the Mufassirin have said, and you're also seeing interesting things about what sort of questions they're dealing with, what's coming to their minds, and what kind of things were being explored before now. And for sure, a lot of those things overlap with the same kind of things that we tend to think about, like what was going through these various people's minds. Like that's something that they do try to answer, and nobody has a direct access to, like, we can't go and interview those people involved in the story, and we can't find out what else was happening, what they were talking about in the background, what were the circumstances.
We have the glimpses that we have,
and for the most part what we have to do is look at what the Qur'an tells us and read through that and around that. And that's not something new that we're doing, of course, but it's possible to reach some different conclusions based on how we interpret certain signals and how we interpret certain circumstantial clues, like some overall things in the story, I think, which are very interesting. And I notice this also when I'm looking at some people's reflections or reactions to some of the things.
Actually, what I wanted to talk to you about, and I'll take an example from you of it. So I'm giving the lectures on this after we have our discussion, and yet you have a bunch of intermediate to advanced students that you're having discussions with about the Surah Yusuf. Yeah. And they're probably also following along, I think, some of what I'm
Yeah,
saying or what we're discussing.
yeah, they are.
So what kinds of conversations have you found that stuck out as you were engaging with them? Because I'm sure they're coming across things they didn't come across before.
Yeah.
And what's that interaction been like?
Well, the students that I'm working with are reading Tafsir al-Razi, which we're also doing together, and Tafsir al-Alusi, which is
Yeah.
a much more recent one, 19th century tafsir. And Tafsir al-Alusi goes into detail about just about everything. So whatever is being discussed in tafsir, we're typically going to find it there. So sometimes the discussions can go down to very, minute points of grammar, and sometimes they're much more about the flow of events and this
Trying to
idea
fill in the gaps of chronology.
yeah. So like some of the most interesting discussions we've had is like about the ayah in which the women had to cut their hands, right? Because in actual fact, in tafsir, in standard tafsir, there isn't that much variation about what's understood by that. But it's interesting that maybe in the modern time, there's been a few various, quite different attempts to explain that in different ways, because for whatever reason, people found it strange or hard to accept that it was just literally a case that some people had been given knives and they were taken aback by what they saw and made a series of cuts in their hand, which is pretty much quite plainly what the ayah is saying. But the people started to look for alternative ways to read some of the phrases, whether it's the word sikeen itself. Is sikeen really a knife, or could it be something else? That was one of the investigations. What about qatta'na aydiyahunna? Literally, they cut their hands or cut them repeatedly. Does that actually
discuss that?
An expression for something else? Like, for example, does it mean they tried their utmost to do something like to mislead and seduce Yusuf, or does it mean, or their reason was something other than what the apparent thing which everyone had pretty much accepted up until now? So we ended up reading a few different theories, and like people have posted on internet forums and stuff, but actually respectable scholars, people who've made a decent case of it, and they've written something. And then, so we were also analyzing some of these alternative theories and trying to see what we think of them. Because just while they were also trying to find holes in the standard account, we were saying, well, but how much do the alternative accounts actually hold up as well? Because the thing about tafsir is, it's not always the case that there's one explanation that is so perfectly clear and free of any objection and free of any wiggle room,
Any alternative view,
right? But just as if we're going to say the standard view presents problems 1, 2, and 3, right? But then if someone's going to come up in an alternative view, we should be ready to say, and that alternative view has problems 4,
1,
5,
2, and 3.
6.
And
then we have to be honest about putting them on the table and saying, okay, well, once we've surveyed all of that, what seems to be most reasonable? And then how do we tie that in with the rest of our understanding about the surah? And sometimes I found that in our discussions, Ustad Nouman, is that because we'd sort of gone a particular direction in how we'd read who is the Aziz and what he's really up to. Do we see him, for example, as a really genial, kind character, very patient and forbearing? And if he's portrayed in that way, then you're going to read certain things in that light.
A certain way, yeah.
And if you're going to see the wife of the Aziz as being in love with Yusuf, and we're going to use the word love, and then that's become so very really ingrained in people's minds. And I noticed that in some people's reactions to our take on things, is that people found it very difficult to accept certain points, because they said, look, the Qur'an is telling us that she was in love with him. And my point or what I think we've tried to come across is that well, let's look carefully and see, like, where does it come that what's happening here was called love? The only time that's mentioned is it was the women of the city, who then said he has like completely overtaken her heart with love. So that was the word that they used. But then we have to ask, okay, well, why did they use that word? Is it an accurate reflection of the situation, or was that
Is that how
itself
they see it?
motivation? Or does the word hub, meaning love, does it have some other shades of meaning? And can it be used ironically? Can it be used mockingly? So
Yeah, or even more so, is Allah endorsing what they're saying, or is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala depicting how these people see love and is giving an insight from their perspective? Because the Quran also speaks from the Pharaoh's perspective, but not endorsing the Pharaoh, or
yeah,
speaks from the devil's perspective, not endorsing the devil, right? So there can if you don't sort of see from the lens of the speaker, and then the larger lens of the Quran.
yeah,
If we only wear the sacred lens, anything that's coming out of the Quran has to be looked at from a divine lens. Then we lose sight of the fact that Allah is sometimes capturing historically certain individuals speaking, and He's teaching us how certain kinds of people think and what kinds of thought process they have, which is part of guidance, understanding people also around us.
And I guess what's going to come up in our conversation today is another thing which I found really interesting about people's reactions was people have come to see that the surah, or certain parts, this ayah maybe in particular, where she says to him, come out in front of them, and then they cut their hands, right? People have taken it that almost the point of this is for us to understand how beautiful Yusuf alayhi salam is.
Right.
Rather than that being an incidental or maybe important detail and fact of the matter, which affects what happened and how we understand it. People have actually taken it almost as, well, that's the purpose. Like that's what the ayah is for, is so that the guidance of that is for us to understand how beautiful Yusuf alayhi salam was.
Right, because we've set that as a cornerstone that must be reinforced and then reinforced and then reinforced. Yes, the hadith is there about his beauty, but it does play a pivotal role in some of what transpired. But to try to make everything that happened a dalil for how beautiful he is, to hammer the point, almost takes away from the scene itself and what's going on, and some of the other things we might miss out on because we're so hung up on this one point.
Yeah. Right? And I noticed in the comments one time someone even said like such and such happened in the movie, and I actually responded to that and I said, I mean, just bear in mind the movie, is a movie, and this is the surah.
Thank God I didn't see it.
Yeah, mashallah, they took it in good spirit, but they just said, well, it's fun, it's a nice movie, which is fine. But
Sakib, were you good? Before we continue,
yeah.
Sakib, are you good?
Okay. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
For the audience, I'll let you guys in on a little bit of a top secret plans. My intention, inshallah, over the coming, for the next 12 months until the next Ramadan, I was kind of making my plans for what kinds of stuff I want to do on social media, what kinds of stuff I want to do for Bayyinah and Bayyinah TV, etc. Especially the uncertainty with COVID and everything that's happening. We want to think about how to be the most productive with the work we're trying to do with spreading awareness of the Qur'an. And part of my agenda, inshallah, is obviously to continue Surah Yusuf, reach a milestone, and then have this comparative discussion along with Yusuf, but actually not limited to this. I want to launch some other things online, and part of that will be, even a one-on-one, you and myself, Suhaib, where we're discussing some principles in tafsir, or some of the challenges in interpreting the Quran, or some common questions that we get. Maybe we have a live open QA session of that sort, because one side of what I really believe should happen is more people should be appreciating the beauty and the relevance of Allah's word in their lives. And the other is we need to be raising the bar about the kinds of, intellectual discussions we're having about the Quran, and the kind of inquisitiveness we should have about the Quran, and get some of these baseline questions answered that people get often, right? And how would we think about that? And how would we try and respond to some of those things? What I don't want to do, it's also important to mention, what I don't want to do going into the future is actually a refutational type discourse where, we're trying to, somebody has a particular point of view or an agenda or whatever, and we're trying to dismantle that or, deconstruct it. There's enough of that available on the internet. There are people that are dedicated to undoing other people, and I'm not interested. I'm interested in furthering inquiry into the Quran, and a really genuine, tadabbur, and as much as we can, facilitate that, inshallah. So I'm excited about that. So
understanding what people understand, and just all on board. Yeah.
Which is why this side conversation that we had, veering away from the Genesis reading, is kind of like a preview of the kinds of discussions you and I, inshallah, are going to be having more of And now that I figured out how to do this, thing, which is so cool, I feel like I'm running a TV show or something. It's so cool. But yeah, so we're gonna do more of this stuff, inshallah, and figure out ways of getting the audience even more interactively involved. So some of this stuff is on the horizon, inshallah, and we'll deal with it as it comes. But anyway, so let's get back to where we were. You got cut off. You were saying something, Saqib, and then you started sounding like you are from the future. So let's start again.
I can't remember what I was saying. I guess just briefly.
You were okay. I was asking about the High Chamberlain. What in the world that means? Is that someone who sits in the chamber?
It's just a senior official, like other people have translated as like the captain of the guard, so like the head of the armed forces or something.
Is the Hebrew rendition of it anything similar to Al-Aziz or anything?
No, I don't think so. Let me look at the verse here. Captain of the guard. No, it's Sar. So it's a word used for prince sometimes as well, but here clearly not prince. It's just a high official.
What about Egyptian master? That's the version of the translation you've given me. He was in the house of his Egyptian master.
Right.
What's the word for master that they're using?
Okay. Which verse is that? It was in the live in the house of verse 2. Wait. Adonav, right? So Adon, that's the word for Lord in Hebrew. So in fact, the word for God in Hebrew, Yahweh, which Orthodox Jews don't pronounce, whenever they come across it, they say Adonai instead. The Lord. So it's that same word that's being used for Potiphar here.
Okay. So shall I read on then?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the Lord made him succeed in his hand, and Joseph found favor in his eyes, and he ministered to him, and he put him in charge of his house and all that he had placed in his hands. And it happened from the time he put him in charge of his house and all that he had, and the Lord had blessed him, again recurring, the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the Lord's blessing was on all that he had in the house and field. And he left all.
If you can just.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, as you notice, the word blessing is really conspicuous here, because it's going to become conspicuous by its absence as we proceed to show the ambivalence of what Joseph is up to with Pharaoh. So one clear difference between the Quranic account and this account is that it doesn't explicitly say here that Potiphar is adopting him as a son, right? Instead, it says that he became his kind of attendants. So the verb there, shara, to make someone your personal assistant. We actually know from historical records that this was a position in Egyptian society. So the merper is someone who was the head of the household. He was extremely powerful. He was in charge of all of his master's affairs. And that's what we're being told about Joseph. So although it doesn't exactly say he was a son, it does give him a rank which is clearly intended to be very high. And what's really interesting is that it's only way later in the story when Potiphar's wife is trying to turn the household and trying to turn his wife against Joseph that she starts calling him a slave, Eved, to kind of remind everyone of what he really is. So at this stage, even though technically it's clear that he is still a slave, he's not an adopted son in the story, it's his high rank that's being emphasized. And later, kind of the reality of the rank will be emphasized by.
When I was discussing this ayah, when we came to the ayah, عَسَىٰ يَنْفَعَنَا وَنَتَّخِذَهُ وَلَدًا, possibly he could be a benefit to us or we could take him as our son. The benefit portion of that verb probably refers to him being of service to them as a servant. But then the idea of taking him as a son, I was thinking about one of the conversations I had a long time ago with Sharif about how the Romans operated and the Caesars operated and how they took sons. And the idea of, they would look for qualities that would be you have your biological son that you have, but then you look for a son that will, succeed you based on the kinds of qualities like loyalty, chivalry, dignity, intelligence, bravery, et cetera, and you basically don't just get the genetic composition that that your son is, but you actually get to pick one from the stock of the military or whatever, and take them up as your son. But the idea also in ancient society, and Qur'an has this theme that the children, when parents get older, are basically running things in the house. And actually, that's even evidenced in the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam. The Nahnu Usba comment is actually a lot about them running things in the house. We get all the stuff done. And why is he so beloved? So the idea of him being a servant and then kind of having qualities of a son, as the Bible describes, it's actually a pretty interesting fusion between those two phrases. The Qur'an, in a very succinct way, kind of put those two things together. That the Bible is talking about in such an elaborate way, and it just kind of summarizes both of them in a sense.
Yeah, and also the thing with the Quran, by placing him as a quasi-son or emphasizing that aspect of his relationship, a surah that is being proclaimed to the Meccans who are steeped in this tribal law and how family is more important than truth. And you kind of see Yusuf al-Islam again and again in conflict with his family and again siding with truth. So it's a message that they really need to hear as well. That's
remarkable. SubhanAllah. So there's a little bit left on this section that they've broken this up into paragraph. And it seems to be talking about the amount of trust that Yusuf alayhi was given. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and he gave no thought to anything with him, there save the bread he ate. And Joseph was comely in features and comely to look at.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, so he's a good-looking guy, right?
I gotta write that down. Like, comely to look at. Okay.
So again, a couple of things. So the recurrence of blessing is a throwback to something we mentioned a couple of chats ago, where you see the blessing that was promised to Abraham, or the covenant that was made with Abraham, that the nations of the world will be blessed through you, is going to be realized now in Joseph, how this blessing is spreading to beyond Israel. Egypt is going to be blessed as well. And this is really interesting. It says that he gave him everything except the food that he ate. So in other words, his most immediate concerns, his food, that he kept for himself. Everything else was given to Joseph, which is really interesting because eventually even the food that the Egyptians eat will be given to Joseph, right? So it's kind of prophetic that about what's going to happen. And again, I think it's indicative of the portrait that Genesis is painting, that here the relationship was healthy and everything was prosperous and the Lord was with him. But there will come a time when power will become too centralized, and even the little bit of autonomy that should be retained for individuals, and that will be gone as well.
So it's, I think, significant to mention here that so far what we've been introduced to is the promotion of Yusuf alayhi salam inside the house of the Potiphar in the biblical version to a place of great deal of trust that his master has put in him. And by direct contrast, you've got in the Quran, وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. You've got this spiritual evolution of Yusuf alayhi salam, the ihsan of Yusuf alayhi salam in all, not just ihsan in what he's doing for his immediate, authority, but actually ihsan towards Allah, and the fact that he has hukum and ilm, like qualities that aren't actually mentioned here, but are in a sense implied. If you give someone this much authority in the home, they would have to be a person of wisdom and great knowledge and know-how and trust. And Allah, instead of talking about the responsibilities that he was given, actually talked about the underlying qualities one must have to actually be given such responsibilities, and attributed that to himself. آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. So it's a really interesting contrast of the building and then the foundation of the building.
Some of the Mufassirin actually took hukm here to refer to that he was actually given some authority. He was given a role to judge between people, that sometimes cases would be brought before Potiphar or the Aziz, and the Aziz would ask Yusuf to make a judgment in the matter.
Yeah.
So some of them
we talked about that.
Direct way, as well as as you said, as an underlying thing that he would need for his various tasks.
So here's yet another parallel. You've got in the Quran, in ayah number 22, you've got the mention of his ihsan. Immediately after is the fitna. وَرَاوَدَتْهُ الَّتِي هُوَ فِي بَيْتِهَا. And here in the biblical account, you've got his state with the Aziz, and from 7 onwards, we're reading. I'll read forward now. And it happened after these things that his master's wife raised her eyes to Joseph and said, "Lie with me." And he refused. And he said to his master's wife, "Look, my master has given no thought with me here to what is in the house and all that he has placed in my hands. He is not greater in this house than I, and he has held back nothing from me except you, as you are his wife. And how could I do this great evil and give offense to God?" And so she spoke to Joseph day after day. I'll stop here.
So if you just notice, there's another interesting parallel, which is the terseness of her speech. So she just says, "Come to bed with me," and then the long khutbah that Yusuf Islam gives to her, which is again the same, similar to the Quran. You know, "Hey talak," that's all she says to him, and then he responds with "Ma'adallah," and you know, right.
Interestingly, the biblical version of "Innahu Rabbi ahsana mathwaya," the equivalent of that, if you say that "Innahu Rabbi ahsana mathwaya" refers to Al-Aziz, is what he talks about here first. And the "Ma'adallah" portion, which is first in the Quran, is here later where he says, "How could I do this great evil and give offense to God?" Right? So there he started, "Ma'adallah innahu rabbi ahsana mathwaya," and here you've kind of got the equivalent of "Innahu rabbi ahsana mathwaya," and then "Ma'adallah."
Yeah, subhanAllah.
And so she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he would not listen to her, to lie with her, to be with her. And this is not something, obviously, in the Quran, that this was an ongoing thing. And we did kind of talk about possibly that being an ongoing struggle, but not explicitly stated in the Quran. And it happened on one such day that he came into the house to perform his task, and there was no man of the men of the house there in the house. And she seized him
that can also just mean people of the house. It doesn't have to be men of the house. And Habayit.
So does that mean that the Bible's saying there were no servants in the home, there was nobody else in the home? It's just
so this is really interesting, because in the next verse she's going to call her servants, and you'll use the same word. She called the Anshe Habayit, right? So if they weren't there, then how's she kind of calling out to them? There is a little bit of tension there. Maybe they're out in the field and she's like screaming out to them or something, but there does seem to be something that requires explanation. And these verses, as we'll see just maybe in a verse or two's time, they gave rise to a lot of speculation, which is where the story of the women and so on is going to come in. But what's interesting is, yes, there's no mention of locking doors here. There's a mention of an empty house instead.
And she seized him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went out.
So seized him, the word tafash, seize, implies violence. So it's not just grabbed hold of him. It does imply that there would have been some force involved. So the idea that it would have been torn is a very natural kind of jump to make from that description.
Oh, so the tearing is not out of the question here in the word that's used.
No, it's not mentioned, but it's easily right. I wouldn't say necessarily say as strong as it's implied, but it's a natural kind of thing to think about.
And help me with this. And he left his garment in her hand. Does that mean that a piece of it, or is it suggesting that it just tore right off and she's just got his shirt?
Yeah, no, tore right off. Yeah.
Okay, so she's it's not a tear like the Quran's account. Now she's got the whole shirt with him and he's run off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, big dub. So big dub beged that's his tunic, his entire tunic.
Oh wow. Okay, so that is a pretty significant difference from the Quran's account.
And also it does suggest then that there was a tear, right? Because if she's kind of grabbing him, how's she going to end up with the entire tunic in her hand?
Right.
Unless it's kind of torn off him.
Right. And he fled and went out. So no alfaya sayyidaha lad al-bab.
No.
And this is very different. They're not reaching the master at the door. By the way, so one thing we didn't discuss, I was reading somewhere, and I think you discussed it too, that there's some suggestion that this wasn't just a room, that she was actually home alone, and he was running from room to room, lock after lock, hallway after hallway, until they get to the front door of the house, where this sort of thing plays out.
I mean, there's a couple of things here in terms of what the Quran tells or doesn't tell. Okay, a thing about the servants being there or not there was a question we dealt with, because later on, وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا, there's literally you'd say a witness. That doesn't mean necessarily an eyewitness to the events. It could just be someone who testifies something. You could have like a character, have like an expert witness, or it can be different sort of witnesses. But there is the possibility that somebody even observed what happened. And then because the Quran uses the words وَغَلَّقَتِ الْأَبْوَابِ, you've got a plural word for doors. So a lot of the Mufassirin took it as like successive doors, even to the extent they said there were like 7 doors. So that would obviously be a huge house, the sort of very outer door, and then an inner one, and then a further inner concentric. Or it could just be like within one room there could be several doors. So taking care of locking them, probably in advance as well, until the final door that she needs to take care of at the time of calling him and beckoning him with haytalak. So there's a sense of she's done a lot of locking. It's also even sometimes said, well, you know what, you could use the word abwab to indicate multiple locks rather than multiple doors. That's how some of the Mufassirin also took it.
Yeah, none of which is here.
No, that detail, as far as I'm aware, is unique to the Quran. So the various versions of the stories that are around, the idea that they meet the master at the door, or at the outer door, whichever door it is, that is unique to the Quran. So if we read a verse to one, it becomes really interesting in terms of the way the Quran is. Yeah,
and the thing that I wanted to just kind of refresh in my mind as I read this, and I'll continue reading, and I wanted to suggest to both of you also, is the Quran is clearly far more abbreviated in its depiction of the story than this account. There's much less wording, and so the very brief wording that the Quran did choose, and then chose to diverge from what's prevalent already known, is really interesting. That Allah is highlighting this dimension, وَغَلَّقَتِ الْأَبْوَابِ. And again, this goes back to something else. نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ أَحْسَنَ الْقَصَصِ, like the best way in which the story can be told for the purpose of drawing lessons, for the purpose of furthering the بِمَا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ وَإِن كُنْتَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ لَمِنَ الْغَافِلِينَ. Actually, even they are ghafilin of doors being locked. Like in that sense, right? So they've become part of.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So just on Ahsan al-Qasas, so that's Ahsan al-Qasas, often translated the best story. I mean, you might think with it being Ma'rifah Ahsan al-Qasas, could you render it as the best part or the best portion of this well-known story?
Yeah, the best portion or the best rendition of it, or the best of the story.
The best out of it.
The best out of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the most beautiful out of the story. Yeah, you could see it that way.
And that's really nice, because and the Quran is recognizing that it is the same story, but we're just going to tell you just the bits you really need to know.
We'll tell it to you in a way that will make you realize that even you were of many dimensions of al-Ghafil.
Right. Subhanallah. Yeah.
Subhanallah. It's interesting.
Spiritually, the idea of the door, right? Because وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ, they raced to the door. Previously, multiple doors were mentioned as being locked, and then all of a sudden it's the door. So, of course, the natural assumption is, okay, this means the outer door. But there's so many different ways you could, I was going to say directions you could go with this, but this is kind of the point, is that it's as if there was one door, like it's almost like he went to one of the doors just hoping to find a solution, even though it's been locked. Just putting his trust in God and just knowing that, well, I can't just stay put where I am. I have to, I can't just accept this just because I've seen doors are locked. And that's why some of the tafsirs even tell us that as he was running to each door, it would just miraculously, the lock would fly open, and then each one would fly open until they reached the outer door where the Sayyid was there.
I'm going to drop a little nugget for both of you to think about on this, and that is that doors, just like the shirt, seems to be a recurring theme in the story from the Quran's point of view. They're going to come into the city from multiple doors later on, and there's going to be bab wahid and bab, متفرقة. So I don't know what that might signify, but it's at least something to ponder over until we get there.
So just another thing, enclosed spaces seems to be another recurring theme in the surah. The well, the room, the prison.
Darkness to redemption. Right. There seems to be that also a recurring theme. The other recurring theme that I talked to you about, Suhaib, was we've reached 2 milestones in the story thus far, as far as major scenes. And at the end of each scene, he's found himself in a very difficult situation. In the first case, the well; in the second case, the prison. And right as he is being put in this, precarious situation, you find Allah's presence mentioned. So when he's being put in the well, وَأَوْحِنَا إِلَيْهِ لَتُنَبِّئَنَّهُمْ بِأَمْرِهِمْ هَذَا. Right at that moment, right? And here, in ayah number 35, as he's going to be hauled away to prison, Allah says, فَاسْتَجَابَ لَهُ رَبُّهُ وَصَرَفَ عَنْهُ كَيْدَهُنَّ إِنَّهُ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. So you've got divine presence mentioned at these strategic points of, the most desperation. Every time we get there, there's Allah's presence. And I was telling you how this may play a role in how we see the two almost opposite names of Allah mentioned in this surah, Latiful lima yasha, so the subtle presence of Allah, and Ghalibun ala amrihi, right? And you've got both of those being juggled, as we get to these. And I want to pay attention to the biblical reading and see if that happens also. But I'm going to keep reading on if you guys are okay with it. Yeah? Okay. So he went out. And so when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called out to the people of the house and said to them, saying, "See, he has brought us a Hebrew man to play with us. He came into me to lie. Yes, that's what it says. He came into me to lie with me, and I called out in a loud voice. And so when he heard me raise my voice and call out, he left his garment by me and fled and went out. And she laid out his garment by her."
Okay, okay, great. So there's a lot happening here. So firstly, make sport, or what did you have? Make fun of us?
No, what I have is, see, he has brought us a Hebrew man to play with us.
To play with us. Okay, so sahak is the verb to laugh, to laugh at us, but it's used euphemistically,
right?
Right, yeah, dahika. So Yitzhak gets his name from there, and it's used euphemistically earlier in Genesis for sexual intimacy as well. So it is a euphemism. So she's hinting at what his intention was there. So note also that she now mentions his race, that he's a Hebrew. So she's clearly trying to get her servants on board with her. By emphasizing this foreigner trying to engage in some kind of an intimate relationship with an Egyptian, and how outraged everyone should be at that.
Interesting. A parallel with Musa alayhi salam and the outrage of the Egyptian police at him. The outsider who killed one of theirs.
Right,
who offended one of theirs.
Yeah,
and he's an outsider who
what now?
I don't know.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, but so there's so much going on here, and this is going to be a little bit scatterbrained, so please bear with me here. So notice that she's going to say virtually the same thing a few verses later. Everything that she said now, she's just going to repeat it almost verbatim to her husband when he comes back. What you see is the husband flies in.
No. Is that just me experiencing the silence?
No, I think he's just having a little moment.
Okay, wait. How long have you been on? Can you tell? Internet? 38 minutes? All right. I'm going to call this a day because he's really excited about this. And I want him to gather his thoughts on this. And we're going to come back same time, same place tomorrow. Yeah?
Inshallah.
What do you say? Inshallah. So hopefully we'll have a smoother connection then. But this is pretty awesome. May Allah Azza wa Jal accept and give us clarity of His revelation. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Suhaib, I'll talk to you soon. Saqib, I know you can't hear me, but may the force of the internet be with you. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.